My son drove his finger into my chest 13 times right in the middle of the party, in front of 50 people jabbing me again and again, while he screamed that I was a senile old parasite clinging to his success. 3 steps away, his wife stood there holding up her phone, the little red dot blinking, laughing with delight like she was watching a show put on for her entertainment. What none of them knew was that they were all standing on land I owned. The house behind them was mine. The cars in the driveway were mine. And the man they were filming like a zoo animal was about to become the last person on earth any of them should have humiliated. I didn't say a word. I just smiled. I need to be honest with you before I go any further, because I've told this story a few times now and people always assume I felt powerful in that moment. I didn't. I felt like something inside my chest had quietly broken, and I knew it wasn't ever going to grow back the same way. Some part of me had still been hoping, right up until that finger hit my breastbone, that my boy would turn out okay. That hope is what died that day. My name is Harlan. I'm 65 years old, and I've lived in and around Denver, Colorado my whole life. I built everything I have, one slow, unglamorous decision at a time. I started with a single delivery truck and a stack of unpaid bills, and over 40 years I turned it into something real. Warehouses, contracts, property, the kind of money that doesn't show up in how a man dresses. I was good with numbers and good with patience. I succeeded at almost everything I ever set my hand to. Except the one thing that mattered most. My son Corin. I failed at Corin, and for most of his life I told myself I just hadn't given him enough. So I gave more. That was my mistake, and I'll own it. But on the 4th of July, on the back deck of a house he thought was his, my son taught me the difference between a person you failed and a person who simply chose who they wanted to be. The grills were smoking. The music was loud. Somewhere a neighbor's kid was setting off those little snap fireworks on the driveway. And my son, red-faced from too much bourbon and something uglier than bourbon, was demanding I sign a document. He wanted me to sign away my rights to the family insurance benefits. He needed the cash badly. His cryptocurrency fund, the one he'd been bragging about for 2 years, was hemorrhaging money and weeks from collapse. I told him no. Calm, quiet, no scene, just no. And that one word woke something up in him. He stepped into me and put his finger against my chest and pushed. Hard, you senile old man, he said, and pushed again. You're a parasite. You've been leeching off my success your whole life. Push, push, push. Each jab landed on the same spot, right over the bone, until I could feel a deep ache spreading out from the center of me. I counted them later, lying awake at 3 in the morning. 13. 13 times my own son put his hand on me like I was furniture in his way. I didn't move. And here's the part I still can't fully explain. The pain in my chest was real, but it wasn't what hollowed me out. It was the sound coming from my left. It was Amara, his wife, draped in a dress that cost more than some people's rent, holding her brand new phone up at eye level, the little red dot glowing, laughing. Not a nervous laugh. Not a somebody should stop this laugh. A delighted one. The kind of laugh you let out when you're enjoying a show. She wasn't filming to protect me. She was filming because she thought my humiliation was content. Let me ask you something, and I want you to actually sit with it. If you've ever stood in a room full of people, while someone treated your dignity like a joke and looked around and realized not one person was going to step in, then you already know the specific cold that moved through me. Right then. It isn't anger. Anger comes later. In the moment, it's just a terrible, echoing aloneness. On that 13th jab, he leaned in close and roared it loud enough for the whole yard to hear. You are nothing without my money. And something in me went very, very quiet. Not broken quiet anymore. Decided quiet. I want to be honest with you here, because I think a lesser version of this story would have me throwing a punch or screaming back. I didn't, and not because I'm a saint. I didn't because 40 years of business taught me one thing above all else. The man who loses his temper loses the room, and the man who keeps his head keeps the leverage. I had all the leverage. He just didn't know it yet. I turned, and I walked off that deck without a word. I didn't explain myself. I didn't owe a goodbye to anyone there. I got in my car, and I drove off into the dark, and somewhere on the highway my hands stopped shaking and a calm settled over me that honestly scared me a little. Because I knew that calm. It was the same focus I felt before closing the biggest deals of my life. The grieving father was gone. What climbed into that driver's seat was something colder, something that only deals in consequences. So let me tell you what these two actually had, underneath the photos. People looked at my son and saw a young man who'd made it. The four-bedroom house with the pool in a nice part of the metro. The two luxury SUVs. The wife who looked like she walked out of an advertisement. For 5 years he'd been posting all of it online, the trips, the dinners, the cars, building this glittering image of a self-made winner. There was just one problem with that image. None of it was his. I knew, because I was the one paying for it. His credit was wrecked. No bank in this state would lend him $1. That beautiful house? I'd bought it outright, in cash, through an LLC I set up quietly to protect him, because I still believed back then that I was building him a foundation. Every month, my account paid the property taxes. My account paid the homeowner's insurance. My account quietly covered bills he probably never even looked at. I stayed silent about all of it because that's what I thought love looked like. Shielding your kid, smoothing the road, waiting for the day they'd grow into the gift. I waited a long time for that day. It never came. What came instead was 13 jabs to my chest and a video of my own humiliation that his wife was, at that very moment, uploading to the internet for strangers to laugh at. So somewhere on that dark highway, I made peace with a hard truth. Their entire world was made of my money, and anything made of my money I could unmake. I drove to my office instead of going home. The building was empty and silent except for the clock on the wall. I unlocked the cabinet, the one that only opens to my fingerprint, and I pulled out the original deed to their house. Every page registered to my LLC. I turned them over one at a time, and I swear the sound of the paper was the most peaceful thing I'd heard all day. Then I picked up my phone. It was 2 a.m. I texted an old contact of mine who runs the biggest asset liquidation firm in the region. The message was 4 words long. Sell this, first thing. By 8 the next morning I was sitting across from him, and I made a decision he called insane to my face. I told him to sell the house at 40% below market value. The only thing I cared about was speed. I wanted it closed and final inside 48 hours. He stared at me. He asked if I was sure. I didn't hesitate for even a second. I picked up the pen and signed, and the black ink against that white paper looked like a verdict. The house was gone. They just didn't know it yet. While my son and his wife slept soundly under a roof that no longer belonged to them, the 48-hour clock was already running, and I had one more thing to do. That night I went home, sat in the dark of my study with only the laptop glowing, and I opened the master account, the one quietly running their entire life on autopilot, and one by one I started switching the lights off. I canceled the payment on the SUV she paraded around online. I killed their premium health insurance. I cut off the organic grocery delivery, the wine club membership, all of it. Every click felt like a clean, surgical cut. Then I saw it, and even I had to stop for a second. It was the family phone plan, and the usage report showed her phone, right then, burning through the high-speed data I paid for to keep uploading that video of me. She was using my money to broadcast my humiliation. I sat there and looked at that for a long moment. I wasn't even angry anymore. I just felt this strange, tired clarity. And then I tapped delete, and their phones went dark. I closed the laptop. Every artery feeding their fake empire was cut, and they had no idea. They thought tomorrow was just going to be another sunny day of brunches and posts and pretending. If you've ever quietly carried someone paid their way, covered for them, they made their life work from behind the curtain, while they took all the credit, then I think a part of you understands the heaviness I felt that night. It wasn't triumph. It was the grief of finally accepting that the person you've been holding up was never going to stand on their own for you. You can love someone and still have to stop carrying them. Those two things can be true at once. The next day the curtain came down, and it started in the one place my son felt most untouchable. At noon he'd set up a lunch at a 5-star steakhouse downtown, with 2 serious investors, men whose money could have saved his sinking fund. He picked the best table. He ordered the most expensive everything. He talked big, the way he always did, and the 2 men nodded along, and you could see my son's confidence swelling with every minute. He thought he had them. The meal ended. He smiled, waved for the check, and slid his sleek black card across the table like the king of the room. The waiter walked it to the terminal. A minute passed. 2. The waiter came back with his eyes down and said quietly that the card had been declined. My son laughed it off, said it was obviously their system. Told them to run it again. The machine gave that flat little beep. Declined. His smile started to freeze on his face. The two investors glanced at each other. He yanked out a second card. Declined. A third attempt. Declined. Red letters on the screen, and a thick, awful silence settled over that beautiful table. Sweat rolled down his forehead. He grabbed his phone to check his accounts, and that's when the second wave hit him. No service. His phone was a dead brick in his hand. No call, no internet, completely cut off from the world. The two investors stood up, looked at him like he was something stuck to their shoe, said they didn't have time for a man who couldn't cover his own lunch, and walked out. He had to empty the cash from his wallet and leave his watch as collateral just to escape that room. He stumbled out onto the sidewalk, humiliated, and he had no idea it was about to get so much worse. Honestly, if that were me on either side of that table, I don't know how I'd have held it together. But here's what I want you to notice, because it matters. That moment was the mirror image of what he did to me on the deck. He humiliated me where I was supposed to be safest, surrounded by family. Now he was being humiliated where he felt safest, performing wealth in front of money. That's not random. That's the shape justice actually takes when it's done right. Across the city, the same nightmare was swallowing his wife. She'd spent the whole morning at an elite spa, the most expensive treatments they offered, and when the bill came, she handed over the card in my name with total confidence. Declined. Again. Again. She started shouting at the staff. She grabbed her phone. No service. Then the manager came over with 2 security guards and explained, politely, that she'd need to pay another way unless she'd prefer the police got involved. With no cash and no phone, she had to slide the diamond bracelet off her wrist and leave it behind, while a room full of wealthy women watched her with quiet contempt. She caught a cab home. My son arrived on foot around the same time, disheveled and gray-faced, and they both stopped dead at the gate. A heavy black chain was wrapped around the iron gate. In the middle of the manicured lawn sat a massive construction dumpster. 3 security guards stood at the front door with flat, patient eyes. My son rushed the gate, shoving at it, and a guard stepped in front of him and told him plainly, the property had legally changed hands. It had been liquidated. They no longer had any right to go inside. My son screamed that it was his house. The guard simply held up a document with my signature and my LLC's seal, checked his watch, and told them they had 15 minutes to grab essentials. 15 minutes. To stuff an entire fake life into black garbage bags. They tore through closets, crying, shoving designer clothes and shoes into trash bags. Their whole image, everything they'd performed for years, reduced to plastic sacks dragged across a lawn. And just as they hauled the bags through the gate, a black pickup truck rolled up and stopped right in front of them. Doors opened. Hard men climbed out. And the real storm, the one even I hadn't fully set in motion, stepped into the daylight. These weren't bankers. The wife went white as paper. My son stood frozen by the torn bags. The man leading them, covered in tattoos, threw a stack of papers down onto the pavement. It was an underground loan agreement. $80,000 at brutal interest. She'd borrowed it months ago, in secret, to buy handbags and keep up the socialite act online. My son stared at his wife like he'd never seen her before, because he hadn't known. He had no idea the woman he'd built his image with had buried them in criminal debt. But those men didn't care about his shock. They grabbed him by the collar of that expensive suit and shoved him into their truck and told him he was going to his office right now to pull money and pay. 30 minutes later, the truck stopped in front of the gleaming glass tower where he worked. They dragged him into the lobby in front of dozens of his co-workers, flipping furniture, shouting about the $80,000 he owed, pointing at him and calling him a fraud living on borrowed money. The mask shattered right there on the marble floor. Then his CEO walked out of a conference room, took one look at the chaos, and didn't ask for a single explanation. Bringing criminal collectors into the building was, to him, the worst thing an employee could do. He pointed at the door. My son was fired on the spot and thrown out onto the street. No home, no money, no job. The arrogant man from the deck was gone. And that total desperation is exactly what pushed him toward the most reckless thing he'd ever do. I want to pause here and be straight with you, because this is where some people start to feel sorry for him, and I understand that. I did too, in flashes. There's a version of my son, the 8-year-old, who used to ride in the cab of my first delivery truck, feet not even reaching the floor, that I will grieve for the rest of my life. But the man he became made his choices with both eyes open. And what he chose to do next told me everything. The debt collectors kept up the threats. He saw no way out. And in his cornered, resentful mind, he landed on a plan he'd break into my cabin outside town and steal the cash he knew I kept in the safe. That night the sky was black, and a cold drizzle was falling. He dressed in all black and came up the back of my property, and in his jacket he was carrying a set of brass knuckles, cold metal. He'd brought a weapon to his own father's home, ready to use it if I got in his way, ready to raise his hand to me a second time. He pried the latch. The door clicked. He slipped inside like a burglar, into a house that was dead silent and completely empty. He clicked on a small flashlight and went straight to my study, to the wall safe. His hands were shaking as he keyed in the old code. The door swung open. There was no money inside, just a single sheet of white paper, sitting alone in the center. He picked it up, one line, in my handwriting. "I am watching you." A chill went through his whole body, and right then, a soft electronic beep sounded from a dark corner, and a small red light began to blink. A camera, recording everything, live, straight to my cloud. And then the silence outside ripped open. Sirens. Red and blue lights sweeping across the windows and over his face. I'd built the trap days earlier. I'd reported an armed break-in to the police before he ever set foot on my land. He stood there frozen, finally understanding he'd walked straight into it, as boots thundered up to the door. If you've made it with me this far into the story, then I'd ask you one small favor before I tell you how it ended. Drop a number 5 in the comments so I know you're still here, and tell me what you think the verdict's going to be. I read these, and I'm always amazed how many of you call it before it comes. It costs you nothing, and it means more to me than you'd think. The courtroom was heavy and silent. I sat in the section for victims, my face still as stone, and I watched my son stand at the defendant's table. Every ounce of the arrogance was gone. He was wearing a loose orange jumpsuit now, and his wrists were cuffed, and every time he shifted you could hear the chains. His wife sat behind him, gaunt, her face scrubbed of all the makeup and all the performance. The judge nodded to the clerk, and the big screen at the center of the room flickered on. It was the video. And I want you to feel how slowly this part moved, because in that room time stretched out like taffy. The whole 4th of July played for the jury. My son's shouting filled the courtroom. The dull, awful sound of his finger hitting my chest, over and over. His voice calling me a worthless old parasite, clear as anything. And underneath all of it, unmistakable, his wife's delighted laughter captured on her own phone, the red dot she'd been so proud of, now burning the evidence into the record against them both. I watched the jurors' faces change. I watched a woman in the second row put her hand over her mouth. Nobody in that room moved. Nobody coughed. You could hear the air handler running. I looked at my son while it played. He kept his head down the entire time. He could not look at the screen, and he could not look at me. And I'll be honest with you about what I felt, because it wasn't the triumph people expect. It was the saddest kind of peace. The kind that comes from finally, completely letting go of a hope you carried for 35 years. Then the prosecutor held up the brass knuckles he'd carried into my home. Undeniable. Armed burglary, conspiracy to commit assault. My son had nothing to say. There was nothing left to say. The judge brought the gavel down, and the crack of it went through the whole room, and he sentenced my son to 7 years in a maximum security facility. A moment later, officers stepped up behind his wife, and a second pair of cuffs clicked shut. Conspiracy and fraud for the 80,000. She broke down sobbing as they led her out. My son finally lifted his head and looked at me with a plea for mercy that had arrived years too late. I turned away, quietly, completely. This story taught me something I wish I'd understood 20 years sooner, and I want to hand it to you plainly, because maybe you need it today. The mistake most of us make, especially those of us who love hard, is that we confuse patience with weakness, and we confuse giving with helping. I gave my son everything, and all it did was teach him that there was no bottom, no consequence, no floor beneath his cruelty. What he never understood, standing on my land calling me a parasite, was that the quietest person in the room is very often the one holding all the power. Kindness without a limit isn't kindness anymore. It's just fuel for someone else's worst self. So here's the one thing I'd ask you to actually do this week, not someday. Look honestly at the people in your life you've been carrying, and ask whether your help is building them up or just paying for them to never grow. And then sit with this question. the one I had to face at 3 in the morning with a bruise on my chest. Somewhere along the way, did your patience stop being love and start being the thing that let someone walk all over you? Now I want to hear from you, and I mean it. Tell me in the comments, do you think I did the right thing? Comment 1 if you think I was right to let the consequences fall the way they did. Comment 2 if you think a father should have forgiven him, even after all that. Comment 3 if you think I went too far. I read every one of these, and I genuinely want to know where you land, because there are nights I still turn it over myself. And tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is there right now. I love seeing how far this story travels. And if you've ever been disrespected by the very people who owed you the most, tell me about it down below. You are not the only one. Somebody scrolling past needs to read that tonight. After the trial, I left the noise of the city behind. I have a small cabin up in the mountains now, where there's nothing but wind moving through the pines, and a kind of peace I hadn't felt in decades. The chains and the orange jumpsuit have faded into the past. The bruise on my chest healed a long time ago, and before I left, I did one last thing. I went to my attorney and set up an irrevocable trust, and I gave it all away, every dollar from the house, every dollar of a lifetime's work, millions of it straight to the children's hospital here in the city. I wanted what I built to go towards saving kids who never had a chance, instead of a man who was handed every chance and threw them all back. My son and his wife will get nothing from me, not 1 cent. When they walk out of those prison gates someday, they'll earn their own way, the way I did, and they'll learn the weight of every dollar the hard way. If this story moved you, or made you think of someone in your own life, do me a small favor and subscribe. It's just me here, telling true-to-life stories about families and the hard, quiet choices that dignity sometimes demands of us, and having you in this community means more than I can say. Stick around, I've got more. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Denver to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.